The wolf's teeth were a white promise of pain against the dark fur of its muzzle. Blood, not its own, stained its jaw. It was enormous, a creature of nightmare and shadow, a beast of charcoal fur and eyes that burned with the agony of a forest fire. It lay half-pinned beneath a fallen pine, its massive flank pierced by a black, fletched arrow shaft. Another was buried deep in its shoulder. Ilara had never seen a wolf this large. It was a monster from the old tales, big as a pony, with paws the size of dinner plates. And it was dying. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run. This was the deep wood, the part of the king's forest her pack had warned her away from. Here, the wild things were not just animals. They were spirits, ancient and unforgiving. But she couldn't move. Her feet were frozen to the snow-dusted earth. The wolf thrashed, a low, guttural sound of pure misery tearing from its throat. Its head slammed against the frozen ground, and the motion threatened to drive the arrow in its shoulder deeper, to tear the life from it in one final ragged burst of agony. It had to stop. If it kept moving like that, it would kill itself. Fear was a cold stone in her gut, but something else moved alongside it. A strange, aching pity that felt like a cord pulling her forward. She saw a flicker, a ghost image superimposed over the snow. Men in dark leather, bows drawn, the glint of a poisoned tip, a snarl of defiance. The images were gone as quickly as they came, leaving behind only the scent of ozone and a dizzying vertigo, her hidden sickness. The flashes that her father had beaten her for, calling them lies and demons. The wolf's head came up, its amber eyes locking on her. There was no reason in them, only a universe of pain. It snarled, a wet, rattling sound. It was going to thrash again, a death throw that would surely end it. Her mind went utterly blank. All thought, all fear, all reason vanished. There was only the sight of the dying animal and a singular, insane impulse. She moved. She dropped to her knees in the snow beside the great beast's head. It snapped at her, its teeth clicking inches from her face. She didn't flinch. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it on its massive, blood-matted skull. The fur was coarse, hot with fever. "Easy," she whispered, the word a puff of white in the frigid air. "Easy now." The wolf stilled for a barest second, its burning gaze fixed on her. Then the pain rolled through it again. A violent shudder racked its body. Its head flew back. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think. She acted. She thrust her left forearm forward, directly into its path, into its open, snarling mouth. The pressure was immense, a crushing vice of bone and muscle. Teeth, long and sharp as daggers, sank into the flesh and wool of her sleeve. A scream caught in her throat, but she choked it down. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded up her arm. She could feel the puncture, the deep, sickening slide of canine through muscle. But the wolf stopped thrashing. Its body went rigid, all its agony, all its frantic energy, focused into the bite. A low whine escaped its throat, a sound of confusion mixed with the pain. Its jaws clamped down, but it wasn't tearing. It was holding, grounding itself on her. Ilara closed her eyes, her own breath coming in ragged, painful sobs. She could feel its hot breath on her skin, the slick wetness of blood, hers and its, soaking her sleeve. She didn't pull away. She pushed into the bite, a silent offering. "Here. Put the pain here. Just stop fighting yourself." The forest was silent save for their breathing. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the slow, deep thrum she could feel vibrating through the wolf's jaw. She let her head fall forward until her forehead rested against its fever-hot temple. "It's all right." She breathed against its fur, the lie tasting of blood and snow. "I've got you." And then, the world fractured. 3 months earlier, the frost had been just as sharp. It clung to the inside of the single window pane in her small, isolated cabin, painting ferns of ice that the weak morning sun could not erase. Alara pulled her thin blanket tighter, the cold a familiar ache in her bones. The word had been delivered by the Pax Beta, his face a mask of official pity that didn't quite hide his disgust. Baron. The healer had confirmed it. After 2 years past her presentation, with no sign of a mate's call and no quickening of her own wolf, the conclusion was inescapable. She was a flaw in the bloodline. A dead end. Defective. Her father had been the one to demand the exile. Not a true banishment. That would have been a mercy. Instead, she was sent to the farthest edge of the Pax territory, to a dilapidated hunter's cabin that had been abandoned for a decade. Close enough to be a member of the Silver Creek Pack in name, far enough to be forgotten. It was a shame he could not abide. Jorik, his chest puffed with his status as a senior warrior, could not have a barren daughter. It reflected on him, on his strength, on his value. Her value had been declared null. So she lived here, on the fringe of the world, mending the rotting walls with mud and moss, trapping rabbits for her meager meals, and trying not to remember the weight of her father's hand. The memories were like the frost, always there, creeping in at the edges of her thoughts. She ran a hand over her left forearm, the rough wool of her tunic a familiar friction against the skin. Even through the fabric she could feel them. The old scars, a network of fine, silvery lines that crisscrossed the flesh from wrist to elbow. Each one a lesson. For talking back. For crying too loud. For the visions that had plagued her as a child. Lies, he had called them, his voice a low growl. You will not bring shame on this house with your madness. The punishment had been swift and sharp, a thin willow switch that left lines of fire on her skin. She had learned to be silent. She had learned to be invisible. She had learned that pain was the price of existence. Her new life was not so different. The pain was just colder, a slow ache of loneliness rather than the sharp sting of a switch. The pack sent a runner once a month with a sack of flour and some salt. It was the bare minimum required by pack law. An acknowledgement that she was, technically, still one of them. The rest was up to her. She spent her days in the woods, the silence of the great northern pines a balm on her frayed nerves. She learned the names of the herbs that grew in the shaded places, the ones that could soothe a fever or stop a bleeding. She learned to read the tracks in the snow, to know the passing of a fox from that of a deer. The forest did not judge her. The wind didn't whisper the word barren behind her back. The trees didn't care that her wolf had never woken. Here, she was not defective. She was just a small, quiet thing trying to survive. It was on one of these foraging trips, deeper than she usually dared to venture, that she found the clearing. It was a place of unnatural stillness. The snow was churned and stained, not with the red of a simple hunt, but with a darker, almost black blood. Splintered arrows lay scattered like broken teeth. Her hand went to the small knife at her belt. This was not the work of wolves. This was men. An ambush. Her heart began to pound. She was trespassing, not just on the king's land, but on the scene of some violent conflict. Then she heard it. A low, pained groan from the far side of the clearing. She crept forward, her boots making no sound on the packed snow. Her eyes scanned the wreckage, the sense of dread thickening with every step. She saw the fallen pine, its roots torn from the frozen earth, and beneath it, the trapped monster, the king's wolf. Though she didn't know it then. She only saw a creature in its final agony. And the world snapped back to the present, to the feeling of teeth embedded in her arm and a forehead pressed against hot, matted fur. The pressure on her arm lessened. It didn't release, but the crushing force eased, becoming something almost careful. The wolf's breathing was still harsh, but the frantic edge was gone. It was just a deep, shuddering rhythm against her own skin. She risked a glance down. Its massive head was still, its jaw locked on her arm. But its eyes, those burning amber pools, were no longer wild. They were focused, aware. They were watching her with a terrifying, ancient intelligence. This was no mere animal. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. This was a shifter. A powerful one. No ordinary wolf grew to this size. This was one of the true Lycans, the kind that ruled these northern lands. The kind she had only heard of in stories told around the winter fire. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the haze of pain. What had she done? She had just offered her arm to one of the most powerful predators in the world. As if hearing her thoughts, the wolf made a low sound, a rumble that vibrated through her bones. It was not a growl. It was something else. A question. Slowly, carefully, it began to release its grip. The pain flared again as its teeth withdrew from the wounds they had made. She bit her lip to keep from crying out, tasting the metallic tang of her own blood. The wolf's jaw came free. It nudged her arm once, a gentle push with its bloody nose, before letting its head fall back to the snow with a heavy sigh. Its eyes never left hers. Elara cradled her arm to her chest. It was a mangled ruin. Blood streamed from a half-dozen deep punctures, staining the snow beneath her a brilliant, shocking crimson. Nausea rolled through her. The wolf watched her, its gaze unwavering. The pain was still there. She could see it clouding the amber depths, but the frantic panic was gone. It lay still, breathing, waiting. It had trusted her. And now, it seemed, it was waiting for her to act again. "The arrows," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They have to come out." She didn't know if it understood. She didn't care. She had to do something. Leaving it like this was a death sentence. She shuffled on her knees, her wounded arm held tight against her body, until she was beside its massive flank. The arrow shaft was slick with blood. It was a wicked thing, barbed and black. It would tear everything coming out. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm sorry." She took a deep breath, gripped the shaft with her good hand, and pulled. The wolf's roar of agony shook the trees. It convulsed, its powerful legs kicking, but it didn't try to bite her. It didn't even turn its head. It took the pain. The arrowhead came free with a sickening sound of tearing flesh. Elara fell back, the bloody arrow clutched in her hand, her stomach heaving. The wolf panted, its sides heaving, but it was alive. One down. Before she could gather her strength for the second, the forest erupted. Men in gray cloaks and steel armor burst into the clearing from all sides. They moved with silent, deadly efficiency, their swords drawn. The King's Guard. At their head was a man with a grim, scarred face and silver hair. He took in the scene in an instant. The downed wolf, the bloody arrow in her hand, her own mangled arm. His eyes, hard as flint, narrowed on her. "Drop it, now!" Elara's hand opened in shock, the arrow falling into the snow. She scrambled back, terror seizing her. She was caught. She had assaulted one of the king's own. They would kill her for this. The guards formed a protective circle around the wolf, their swords pointed outward, their eyes scanning the trees for any remaining threat. The silver-haired man knelt beside the wolf, his hand gentle on its neck. "Majesty," he murmured, his voice low and full of concern. "Can you shift?" "Majesty?" Elara's blood ran cold. No, it couldn't be. The great wolf shuddered. A ripple of change moved through its form, a sickening distortion of bone and sinew. It shrank, fur receding, limbs elongating and reforming. Where the monster had lain, there was now a man. He was naked despite the biting cold, his body a canvas of muscle and old scars. His hair was the black of a raven's wing, plastered to his forehead with sweat and blood. Even weakened, lying in the snow, his presence was overwhelming. He was power incarnate. He pushed himself up on one elbow, his gaze sweeping over his guards before landing with burning intensity on her. His eyes were the same molten amber, filled with an ancient knowing light. This was him, Fenric, the Alpha King, the ruler of the North, the wolf whose teeth had just been buried in her arm. "Get her," the king commanded, his voice a low rasp, thick with pain but absolute in its authority. Two guards seized her, hauling her to her feet. Elara cried out, a fresh wave of agony lancing up her arm as one of the guards grabbed it. "Gently, you fools!" the king snarled, the sound more wolf than man. The guards flinched, their grip easing but not releasing. King Fenric rose to his feet, swaying slightly. The silver-haired man, his beta, she assumed, draped a heavy fur cloak over his shoulders. The king ignored him. He walked toward her, each step deliberate, his amber eyes never leaving hers. He stopped a foot away, a towering, intimidating figure. He looked from her face down to her arm, which was still dripping blood onto the pristine snow. Then he looked back at her eyes. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cold fury and something else, something she couldn't name. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Elara," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "of the Silver Creek Pack." "And what were you doing here, Elara of Silver Creek?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Were you part of the ambush? The scavenger come to pick the bones?" The accusation was like a slap. "No, I was foraging. I found you." "You found me," he repeated, his tone laced with disbelief. He gestured to the bloody arrow she had dropped. "And decided to finish the job?" "I was trying to help." The words burst out of her, fueled by terror and a sudden, sharp indignation. "You were thrashing. You were driving the other one deeper. I pulled it out." His gaze was piercing, searching her face for a lie. She met it, her fear warring with a desperate need to be believed. For the first time in her life, she didn't look away. A strange flicker of something. Confusion? Respect? Passed through his eyes. He glanced at his beta. "Garrick, is this true?" Garrick knelt and examined the wound on the king's flank. "The arrow is out, Majesty. It was a clean pull, not the work of an enemy." He then looked at the second arrow still buried in Fenric's shoulder. "This one remains." Fenric's gaze returned to Elara. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. He was studying her, his eyes tracing the lines of her worn tunic, the fear in her eyes, the blood on her arm. "You are hurt," he stated, his voice flat. It was such a simple, obvious statement, yet it sent a tremor through her. No one had ever stated her pain so plainly. It was always ignored, or dismissed, or the cause of their own anger. "It's nothing," she mumbled, the lie automatic. "Liar," he said, the word not an accusation but a simple fact. He reached out, his fingers cold but surprisingly gentle, and took her wounded arm. He held it as if it were a piece of fragile glass, his thumb brushing near the ragged edge of a puncture wound. She flinched, a hiss of pain escaping her lips. His eyes darkened. He looked at the deep, clear marks his own teeth had made. Then he spoke, his voice so low only she could hear it. "I did this." It wasn't a question. It was a confession. "You were in pain," she whispered. "You didn't know." "Take her back to the keep," he ordered his guards, his eyes still locked on hers. "Put her in the West Wing, and send for Healer Maeve, immediately." The guards looked at each other, confused. The West Wing was for honored guests, not for unknown, potentially hostile shifters found at the scene of an assassination attempt. "Did you not hear me?" Fenric's voice dropped, and the temperature of the air seemed to plummet with it. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and the guards immediately stiffened. "Yes, Your Majesty." They led her away. As she was escorted from the clearing, she looked back. King Fenric was still standing there, the fur cloak clutched around him, watching her. His face was a storm of unreadable emotions, but his amber eyes held hers until the trees obscured him from view. She was his prisoner. And his patient. She had no idea which was worse. The royal keep was a fortress of black stone and dark timber, a spear of defiance against the endless white of the northern wilderness. It was a place of power, of echoes and stone-cold silence. Elara felt small and insignificant within its walls, a mouse brought into a dragon's lair. They put her in a room larger than her entire cabin. A fire roared in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the tapestries that hung on the walls. The bed was piled high with furs, and a basin of steaming water sat on a wooden stand. It was more luxury than she had ever known, and it felt like a cage. Healer Maeve arrived shortly after. She was an old woman with eyes as sharp and knowing as a hawk's. She clucked her tongue as she unwrapped the makeshift bandage the guards had tied around Elara's arm. The king's own teeth, Maeve murmured, her fingers probing the wounds with practiced gentleness. A powerful mark to bear. It will scar. But you will not lose the arm. Elara said nothing. She just stared into the fire as the healer cleaned and stitched the deep punctures. The pain was a dull, throbbing thing now, a constant reminder of the teeth, the blood, the amber eyes. He asked me to tend to you personally, Maeve said, her voice casual. The king does not ask such things. Not for anyone. Elara remained silent. What could she say? That she had let the most powerful man on the continent bite her out of a moment of insane pity? That she was a barren outcast who had no place in this world of kings and healers? Maeve finished her work, wrapping the arm in clean linen bandages. You are exhausted. Rest. Someone will bring you food. The healer paused at the door. He is a hard man, our king. The North has made him so. But he is not unjust. Elara didn't know what he was. She only knew that his power was a physical presence that made the air crackle, and his eyes saw far too much. She was his prisoner, held in a gilded cage, and she was terrified of what he would do with her. The next days were a blur of pain, fever, and confusion. She slept fitfully, her dreams filled with flashing images of the ambush, of snarling wolves and dark-cloaked men. She ate the food that was brought to her, simple broths and breads that tasted of ash in her mouth. She was an adversary here, she knew that. A piece of a puzzle the king had not yet solved. She had to be careful. On the third day, he came. He entered the room without a sound, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper shadows of the corridor. He was dressed now, in simple black trousers and a dark tunic. The fur cloak was gone, but the aura of power clung to him like a shroud. He moved to the fire, staring into the flames as she had done. He was wounded still. She could see the stiffness in his shoulder, the slight favor he gave to his left leg. The healer says you will recover fully, he said, his back to her. His voice was deep, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the very stones of the floor. Yes, Your Majesty, she whispered, pulling the furs tighter around herself. The men who ambushed me were from the Black Fang pack, he continued, his tone conversational but with a steel edge. Mercenaries, hired by someone with a great deal of gold and a grudge. He turned to face her. His amber eyes were intense, searching. They used a fast-acting poison. Had you not intervened, I would have died in that clearing. Elara's heart stuttered. I only did what anyone would have. No, he said, taking a step closer. Anyone else would have run, or they would have been part of the trap. You were neither. He stopped at the foot of her bed. Why did you do it? Why help a beast that was about to tear you apart? She looked down at her hands. I don't know. It seemed necessary. Necessary to let it maul you? The disbelief was sharp in his voice. Necessary to stop the pain, she corrected him, her voice quiet but firm. Your pain. The silence that followed was profound. He just stared at her, his face a mask of stone. But she saw it again, that flicker of confusion in his eyes. He was a king, a warrior. He understood violence and power and strategy. He did not understand this. He did not understand her. "You are from the Silver Creek pack," he said, changing the subject. "Jorik's pack." Alara stiffened at the mention of her father's name. "Yes. I know him, a loud man. Ambitious." Fenric's eyes narrowed. He does not seem the type to sire a daughter with a spirit of self-sacrifice. The barb hit its mark. She flinched as if struck. "My father and we are not close," I gathered. He took another step, his presence filling the room, making it hard to breathe. "I owe you a debt, Ilara of Silver Creek. A life debt. And I do not like being in debt." "I ask for nothing," she said quickly. "Just let me go home." "This is your home now," he stated. It was not a suggestion, it was a command. "You will remain here, under my protection, until I have unmasked the traitor who paid for my death." "Protection?" She scoffed, a spark of her old fire returning. "Or imprisonment?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a cold, dangerous thing. "The line is often thin. But you are safer as my prisoner than you are free. Whoever tried to kill me will not be pleased to learn of a witness who saved my life." He was right. She knew he was right. And that terrified her more than anything. "You will have everything you need," he continued, "but you will not leave this keep." He turned to go. At the door, he paused. "You are the only thing that has felt real since the ambush," he said, his voice a low, rough murmur. He didn't look at her. He just spoke the words into the shadows of the hall. "Everything else is poison and lies, but you are truth." Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the roaring silence, his words hanging in the air like smoke. It was not a declaration of love, it was a statement of fact, a confession of a different kind. He, the king of lies and politics, had found one true thing, and it was her. A broken, barren girl from the edge of the world. The days that followed were a strange, tense dance. They were adversaries, locked in a stalemate. He was the king, used to command. She was the outcast, used to silence. He would visit her room each evening, standing by the fire, speaking of the investigation, of the political maneuverings of the rival packs. He never sat. He never relaxed. She would listen, her hands clasped in her lap, offering quiet observations that sometimes surprised him with their astuteness. Her flashes were becoming more frequent in his presence, little glimpses of people's intentions, of past conversations. She saw the ghost of a courtier accepting a bag of gold, the faint image of a map spread on a table in a rival's tent. She kept these visions to herself, afraid of his reaction. One evening, Healer Maeve came to change her dressings. Fenric was there, standing by the window, staring out at the falling snow. "The wounds are closing well," Maeve said, her touch gentle as she unwound the linen. "The king's mark is a potent thing. It heals as it harms." Alara looked at her arm for the first time since the attack. The puncture wounds were no longer raw and open. They were closing into angry red circles, the skin around them bruised and tender. They would be scars, permanent reminders of her moment of madness. But as the last of the bandage came away, something else was revealed. Beneath the new, raw marks of the wolf's bite, the old scars stood out in stark relief. The fine, silvery lines of her father's discipline. A roadmap of a childhood spent in fear, now overlaid with the brutal sigil of the king's pain. The room went silent. Maeve's breath caught in her throat. Fenric, who had turned from the window, froze, his eyes, those burning amber furnaces, fixed on her arm. He saw it all. The fresh, violent proof of her sacrifice for him. And the pale, faded testament of a lifetime of suffering that had come before. He moved. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his face a thundercloud. He knelt before her, his movements stiff with a sudden terrible tension. He didn't ask. He reached out and took her arm, his touch infinitely gentle. He lifted it, turning it in the firelight. His thumb traced one of the old silver lines, a scar so faded she had almost forgotten it was there. "Who?" he breathed, the word a plume of barely controlled rage. Alara tried to pull her arm back, a wave of shame washing over her. She didn't want his pity. She didn't want him to see this part of her, this weakness. His grip tightened, not painfully, but with an absolute, unbreakable strength. "Who did this to you?" "It was a long time ago," she whispered, her eyes on the floor. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me," he growled, the sound low and feral. He looked up, and the cold mask of the king was gone. In its place was a raw, naked fury that stunned her. This was the wolf. This was the beast she had calmed in the snow. "Tell me his name." "My father," she choked out, the admission costing her more than she could have imagined. "His name is Yorick." Fenric closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the rage was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly calm that was far more terrifying. He released her arm, placing it gently back in her lap. He rose to his feet and looked at Maeve. "Finish your work. See that she has anything she desires." Then he turned and walked out of the room. He didn't say another word. But Alara knew. Something had just been set in motion. A storm was coming, and her father was standing directly in its path. 2 days later, Yorick arrived at the keep. He blustered his way into the great hall, demanding an audience with the king. He had heard the rumors that his worthless, barren daughter had been taken in by the king himself. He was here to reclaim his property, or perhaps to leverage the situation for his own gain. Fenric granted the audience. Alara was not summoned, but the guards at her door had been doubled, and she could feel the tension in the air, a low hum of impending violence. She paced her room, her good hand rubbing her bandaged arm. She had a vision, a flash of her father's face, contorted in fear. It made her feel sick. The confrontation was, by all accounts, short. Garrick told her about it later, his face grim. Yorick had entered the throne room, full of bluster and false concern for his poor, lost daughter. He'd spoken of her fragility, her flights of fancy, her uselessness. He'd offered to take the burden off the king's hands. Fenric had listened in silence, his face unreadable, his hands resting on the arms of his great stone throne. When Yorick had finished, the king had simply said, "Show me your hands." Confused, Yorick had held out his calloused warrior's hands. "No," the king had said, his voice dropping to that dangerous calm. "The other one, the one you use for willow switches." The color had drained from Yorick's face. "She is no longer your daughter," the king had declared, his voice ringing through the silent hall. "She is under my protection, and the price for every mark you ever laid on her will be paid in full." Yorick had been stripped of his rank and titles. He was exiled, not to the edge of the territory, but to the Deadlands in the south, from which no one ever returned. He was declared packless, nameless, an outcast. The early villain, her personal tormentor, had been dealt with. It was over. But Alara felt no triumph, only a vast, empty weariness. The closing of that chapter only revealed the larger, more dangerous book. Fenric had made a public declaration. He had claimed her, in a way. And in doing so, he had painted a target on her back. His enemies, the ones who still moved in the shadows, now had a new weakness to exploit. The political trap he was in had just snapped shut a little tighter. And she was the bait. The atmosphere in the keep shifted. The adversarial tension between her and Fenric was gone, replaced by a heavy, protective watchfulness on his part and a deep, uncertain confusion on hers. He had avenged her. He had defended her honor. No one had ever done that. She started to see more of the keep. He allowed her into the library, a vast dusty room filled with ancient scrolls and leather-bound books. She befriended a young kitchen maid named Lyra, a quiet girl with wide, curious eyes. It was in Lyra that the true threat finally showed its face. Alara had begun to trust her flashes, her strange time sense. She learned to focus, to let the echoes of the past wash over her. In the library, touching an old treaty, she saw the face of the courtier who had taken the gold. Lord Valerius, a trusted advisor on Fenric's own council. She had to tell him. She found Fenric in the armory, sharpening a great sword with long, smooth strokes of a whetstone. The sound was rhythmic, meditative. "Valerius is the traitor," she said, without preamble. He stopped, the blade stilling. He looked up at her, his amber eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" She took a breath. "I see things. Echoes. I saw him take the gold from a Blackfang agent." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She expected disbelief, scorn. The same reaction her father had given her. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I have suspected him for weeks, but I had no proof." He set the sword aside and rose. "This power of yours? How long have you had it?" "All my life. My father called it madness." "Your father was a fool," Fenric said simply. "It is not madness. It is a gift." He reached out, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. The contact was electric, a jolt of warmth against her cold skin. "And it may be the key to our survival." But Valerius was clever. Before Fenric could move against him, he acted. It happened during the Midwinter Festival. The keep was alive with rare celebration. Music echoed in the halls. Alara, feeling braver, had wandered down to the kitchens with Lyra to watch the bakers pull the spiced cakes from the ovens. The attack was sudden and silent. A handful of men, their faces masked, Blackfang assassins smuggled inside by Valerius. They didn't go for the king. They went for the kitchens. For the children. They grabbed Lyra, a knife to her throat. It was a diversion. A message. "We can get to anyone. We can get to her." Alara screamed. The assassins began to back out of the kitchens, dragging the terrified girl with them. Guards were running, shouting, but the corridors were crowded with festival-goers. Chaos was their shield. Fenric was there in an instant, a blur of motion. He appeared at the far end of the hall, his face a mask of cold fury. He was unarmed, but he was more dangerous than any man with a sword. "Let the girl go, Valerius," Fenric roared, his voice shaking the very stones. Valerius himself stepped out from behind a tapestry, a cruel smile on his face. "She is the price for my safe passage, Your Majesty. A small one, I think." They were trapped. If Fenric moved, Lyra would die. Alara's mind raced. Panic seized her. She saw Lyra's terrified face, the glint of the blade at her throat. Despair washed over her. They were going to lose. Then her eyes fell on something on the wall behind Valerius. A great, ancient shield hanging as a decoration. It was from the time of the first kings, forged in dragon's fire, so the legend said. It was covered in runes of power, dormant for centuries. Without thinking, she ran. Not at Valerius, but along the wall. "Alara, no!" Fenric shouted. She ignored him. She reached the shield, her fingers stretching out. She needed to do something, anything. As her hand made contact with the cold, ancient metal, the world exploded. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A wave of energy surged from the shield, up her arm and into her very soul. The runes on the shield blazed with a brilliant white light. Her time sense, the little flickers and echoes, erupted into a roaring torrent. She didn't just see the past. She felt the shape of the immediate future. She saw the assassin's hand tensing to cut Lyra's throat. She saw Valerius drawing a hidden poisoned dagger. She saw Fenric's lunge, a half-second too late. She saw the path to failure. And she refused it. "Now!" she screamed, pouring all her will, all her desperation, into the word. The light from the shield pulsed, a wave of pure force that slammed into the assassins. It wasn't a physical blow, it was temporal. For a single, frozen heartbeat, they were trapped in the moment before, their muscles locked, their intentions laid bare. It was all Fenric needed. He moved like a phantom, a streak of black vengeance. He was on the assassin holding Lyra before the man could even register the flash of light. A snap of bone, and the man fell. Fenric shoved Lyra behind him, into the arms of his guards, his body a shield between her and the remaining threat. Valerius, recovering, lunged with his poisoned dagger, aiming for Fenric's back. Alara raised her hand, the light from the shield still pouring through her. She didn't know what she was doing. She just acted. She pushed. A shimmering wall of force, woven from time and light, slammed into Valerius, throwing him back against the stone wall with enough force to crack the stones. The dagger clattered to the floor. The battle was over in 5 seconds. The light faded. Alara stumbled, her legs giving out. The power receded, leaving her gasping, drained, and utterly changed. She fell to her knees, her hand still tingling from its contact with the shield. Silence descended on the great hall. Everyone, guards, servants, nobles, stared at her. At the girl who had been the barren outcast, the girl who had just commanded magic none of them had seen in 1,000 years. Then Fenric was there. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the captured traitor, ignoring the crying child, ignoring his entire court. His eyes, those amber flames, were wide with awe. He reached out, not for her arm this time, but for her face. His calloused warrior's thumb gently brushed her cheek. "Sorceress," he breathed, the word a prayer. He pulled her to her feet, his arm a band of steel around her waist, holding her up. He turned to face the stunned hall, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Let it be known," he declared, his gaze sweeping over every shocked face. "This is Alara. She is not my prisoner. She is not my guest." He paused, his eyes finding hers, and in their depths, she saw a raw, fierce emotion that stole her breath. It was not just protection. It was not just awe. It was love. A wild, possessive wolf's love. "She is my queen." The reunion was not in the throne room, amidst the whispers of the court. It was hours later, in the quiet of her chambers. The keep was settling, the traitors in chains, Lyra safe with her family. Fenric entered and simply closed the door behind him. He walked to her, his face stripped of all its royal masks. He looked tired, and wounded, and more human than she had ever seen him. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough. She nodded, unable to speak. She felt hollowed out, scoured clean by the power that had flowed through her. "What you did," he began, then shook his head, at a loss for words. "I have never seen such power." "I didn't know I could," she whispered. "It just happened." "It happened because it is you," he said, his voice full of conviction. He took her hands in his. His were warm. "All my life, I have been surrounded by power. The power of swords, of politics, of fear. It is all cold. It is all about taking." He looked down at their joined hands. "Your power. It is about protecting. It is warm. It is life." He looked up, and his amber eyes were shining with unshed tears. "I am the king of a frozen land, Alara. My heart, my soul, they were frozen too. For centuries, I have been alone, trapped in duty and winter." He raised one of her hands and pressed it to his chest over his heart. She could feel the strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "Until you," he said, his voice breaking. "You walked into my forest of ice and snow, and you brought the sun with you. You took my pain into yourself without a second thought. You saw the rot in my court. You saved a child I had failed to protect." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "I love you," he whispered. the words she had never thought to hear, the words that he had fought against. I love you, Elara. And it does not feel like a curse. It feels like a thaw. Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief, of sorrow for the girl she had been, of overwhelming, impossible joy. The self-doubt, the worthlessness that had been carved into her soul, finally began to break apart, melting away under the warmth of his confession. I thought I was nothing, she cried softly, a broken thing. You were never broken, he murmured, his lips brushing hers, a touch as soft as snowfall. You were a sword waiting to be drawn from the stone. He kissed her then. It was not a king claiming his queen. It was a man, saved and humbled, giving his heart to the woman who had shown him what it was to feel again. It was the end of the winter. It was the beginning of everything. 6 months later, the sun streamed through the large glass windows of the Royal Solar, warming the polished wooden floor. Spring had come to the north, a riot of green and life that felt more vibrant than any in living memory. Elara sat on a cushioned bench, a book open in her lap, though she wasn't reading. She was watching Fenric. He was on the floor, on a large fur rug playing with Lyra. The young girl, now a permanent ward of the court, and Elara's devoted shadow, was giggling as the great Alpha King, on his hands and knees, pretended to be a clumsy bear cub, nuzzling her side. The sight sent a wave of warmth through Elara, a feeling of rightness that was still new, still precious. Her title was Queen, but her role was something more. Her time sense, now controlled and honed with Fenric's help, had become the kingdom's greatest shield. She could perceive the echoes of deceit, the whispers of conspiracy, the faint tremors of future threats. The political traps that had once ensnared Fenric were now laid bare before her sight. They were a team, his strength and her sight, wolf and sorceress, king and queen. He looked up and caught her watching him. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, a smile that was hers and hers alone. It transformed his harsh features, making him look younger, freer. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a steady, loving light. He rose and came to her, scooping her up from the bench as if she weighed nothing. She yelped in surprise, laughing as he settled her on his lap. You are quiet today, my heart, he murmured, his lips against her hair. Just happy, she confessed, leaning back against his solid chest. She ran her hand over his forearm, her fingers tracing the faint, silvery lines of his own old scars, marks of battles fought long before she was born. Her own arm bore its marks. The neat, round scars from his bite were a pale silver now, a permanent constellation on her skin. They lay over the older, thinner lines of her past. She no longer saw them as a map of pain. They were a story of a girl who had been declared worthless, who had found a dying wolf, and who had, in saving him, saved herself. The emissaries from the southern packs arrived today, he said, his voice a low rumble against her back. They are coming to see the Witch Queen of the North. She smiled. Let them come. I have nothing to hide. He chuckled, a deep, warm sound. No, you don't. He held her tighter. We have a long road ahead, rebuilding the alliances, rooting out the last of Valerius's rot. I know, she said, feeling no fear, only anticipation. The future was no longer a terrifying void, but an open road. There would be more challenges, more adventures. But they would face them from a place of strength, of unity. Together. She belonged. She had a home, a pack, a family. She had a king who saw her, not as a broken outcast, but as the magic that had saved his world. She was the hidden queen, found at last, and her reign, beside the wolf who had marked her soul, was just beginning.